It was a cold Monday morning, and the city streets were already buzzing with people rushing to work. Cars honked. The smell of coffee floated through the air, and tall glass buildings reflected the early sunlight. Among the crowd was Marcus Reed, a man who looked calm and focused. He wore a simple gray hoodie, black jeans, and sneakers. Nothing about him screamed millionaire or CEO. He carried a small laptop bag and walked toward one of the biggest corporate towers in the area, the headquarters of Dunlop Enterprises, a company his firm had been working with for months. Marcus was known for being humble. He never cared much for fancy suits or expensive watches. He believed that a person's worth wasn't shown by how they dressed, but by what they stood for. That morning, he decided to visit Dunlop Enterprises without announcing himself. He wanted to see how the company operated on a normal day, how they treated people who weren't obviously important. It was his quiet way of understanding their work, culture before finalizing a massive $10 million contract. When Marcus reached the front door, he smiled politely at the receptionist and began to walk inside. But before he could take more than 2 steps, a voice stopped him. "Excuse me, sir." It was Daniel, the floor manager. He was in his early 40s, dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, and carried himself with authority. He walked quickly toward Marcus with a slightly suspicious look. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. Marcus turned toward him, still calm. "Yes," he said softly. "I have a meeting upstairs." Daniel frowned. "A meeting? With who?" he asked, looking Marcus up and down. "Are you delivering something? Maintenance? You can't come through here without clearance." For a moment, Marcus was silent. He didn't want to start a scene. "No, I'm not delivering anything. I'm here for a meeting with your executive team," he repeated. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe it. To him, the man in front of him didn't look like someone who would sit with top executives. He noticed Marcus wasn't wearing a badge or carrying a briefcase. "Look," Daniel said with a small sigh. "I'm sorry, but this entrance is for employees and official guests. You'll need to use the side door or check in with security first." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The side door?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Daniel nodded. "It's for deliveries and visitors who don't have clearance. It's just around the corner." Marcus nodded slowly, realizing what was happening. It wasn't the first time someone had judged him based on his appearance or his skin color. As a successful black CEO, he had faced moments like this before. But each time it still stung a little. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "Are you sure you want me to use the side door?" Marcus asked. Daniel crossed his arms. "I'm just doing my job, sir. Rules are rules." The receptionist nearby looked uncomfortable but said nothing. A few employees passing through the lobby began glancing over, whispering quietly. Some smiled awkwardly. Others avoided eye contact. To them, it looked like a misunderstanding. To Marcus, it was a reminder of something deeper. How easily people assume things without asking questions. Still calm, Marcus took out his phone and checked the time. He didn't want to argue. He simply said, "All right then," and stepped aside. But before he could move, a young assistant from the upstairs office came rushing down the stairs, panting slightly. "Mr. Reed," she called loudly, her voice echoing through the lobby. "We've been waiting for you. The board is ready." The entire lobby fell silent. Daniel's confident posture vanished instantly. He blinked, confused, then looked at Marcus again, realizing the man he had just stopped wasn't a visitor or a delivery driver. He was the CEO of the company his firm was about to sign a $10 million contract with. Marcus gave a small, polite smile, not angry, but firm. He didn't say anything harsh. Instead, he simply nodded to the assistant and began walking toward the elevators. The sound of his footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor. Daniel stepped aside quickly, his face pale, muttering something like, I didn't know, sir." Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. As the elevator doors closed, Daniel stood frozen, feeling a mix of embarrassment and guilt. The other employees looked at him with wide eyes, some whispering, others pretending to be busy. The receptionist avoided his gaze, pretending to type something on her computer. Marcus, inside the elevator, took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. He thought about how often people were judged by appearances, how often kindness was replaced by assumptions. He knew that the moment downstairs would stay with him. not because of the insult, but because of what it revealed about the company's values. That short encounter had told him more than any business presentation ever could. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the top floor. Marcus stepped out ready to meet the board, but also thinking about the decision he would soon have to make. Downstairs, Daniel stood at the door, still processing what had just happened. He had stopped a man who could change the company's future, and he had done it out of pure judgment. He didn't realize it yet, but that small mistake was about to cost much more than just embarrassment. The morning that had started like any other was about to become a lesson no one in that building would ever forget. The elevator doors opened, and Marcus stepped into the top floor with quiet confidence. The air was cooler there, the carpets thicker, and the smiles a little too practiced. But downstairs, Daniel was still frozen in shock, trying to process what had just happened. He kept replaying the scene in his head, the way he had stopped Marcus, the tone he used, the assumption he made. Every second felt heavier now. Just 10 minutes earlier, Daniel had thought he was doing his job, keeping the building secure, making sure no one slipped in uninvited. But deep down, he knew something else had guided his decision. It wasn't just about the rules. It was the way Marcus looked. Casual clothes, no badge, quiet confidence that didn't fit the usual corporate guest image. He hated to admit it, but he had judged the man before even asking a real question. Meanwhile, Marcus was sitting across a long glass table in the boardroom. Executives smiled, shook his hand, and thanked him for coming. "We're excited to finalize this partnership," said the company's president, a tall man with silver hair and a salesman's grin. Marcus smiled politely, but his mind was still downstairs, on the encounter that had just happened at the door. He wasn't angry, but something in him felt heavy. That moment told him everything about the company's culture. A company's attitude wasn't just shown in meetings or presentations. It lived in how their people treated strangers. A few minutes later, Daniel entered the top floor, his ID badge trembling slightly in his hand. His supervisor had told him to bring some documents to the meeting room. When he saw Marcus sitting there, comfortably discussing business with the board, his heart nearly stopped. Marcus noticed him too. Their eyes met for half a second, long enough to make Daniel's stomach twist with guilt. He wanted to apologize, but the words stuck in his throat. The president smiled and said, Daniel. Come in. Just leave the papers here." Daniel walked slowly, feeling like every step echoed his mistake. He placed the papers on the table, whispered a quick, "Excuse me," and turned to leave. But before he could go, Marcus spoke, his voice calm yet powerful. "Actually," Marcus said, glancing at him, "I've already met Daniel this morning." The room went quiet. Everyone looked between the two men, sensing something beneath those words. Daniel froze in place, his face turning red. The president chuckled nervously. "Oh, really? Small world. How do you two know each other?" Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair. "He greeted me downstairs when I arrived," he said evenly. "Made quite an impression." Daniel swallowed hard. He could feel every eye in the room burning into him. The president frowned slightly, unsure what Marcus meant. Marcus gave a small smile. Not bitter, not vengeful, but sharp enough to make the point. "Sometimes," he continued softly, "first impressions can tell you a lot about a company." The president's smile faded. He understood now. A chill passed through the room. No one said a word for several seconds. Daniel lowered his head, wishing he could disappear. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but it felt too late, too small compared to what he had done. Marcus didn't drag it out. He turned back to the president and continued the meeting as if nothing had happened. But everyone could feel the shift, the tension hanging in the air, the uncomfortable silence between business talk and personal guilt. Daniel walked out of the room quietly, his heart pounding. He didn't even remember walking back to his office. All he could think about was how one quick judgment, one careless moment, could have destroyed a relationship worth millions. As the meeting went on, Marcus listened to the executives present their plans and proposals. Their words sounded polished, their numbers perfect. But for Marcus, the deal no longer felt right. He couldn't forget how their employee had treated him, not as a guest, not even as a person, but as someone who didn't belong. To him, that was the real test. Not what they said in meetings, but what they showed in moments of truth. By the time the presentation ended, Marcus had already made up his mind. The decision was forming quietly in his heart, like a storm building far out at sea. He thanked the team politely, stood up, and shook hands with everyone. His face remained calm, but his eyes held a distance, the kind of distance that meant something was already broken. Downstairs, Daniel sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen. Every phone ring made him flinch. He didn't know yet that his mistake had already changed the company's future, but deep inside, he could feel it coming. What had begun as a simple misunderstanding had turned into something much larger, a mirror reflecting prejudice, pride, and power in one uncomfortable moment. And while Marcus walked out of the building with quiet dignity, Daniel was left with a silence he would never forget. The meeting had just ended, and the sound of polite applause filled the boardroom. Everyone was smiling, shaking hands, talking about future goals and sharing promises that sounded polished and professional. But for Marcus, the words meant little now. His mind kept drifting back to that moment at the entrance, the suspicious stare, the tone, the quiet humiliation that hung in the air. He had faced worse in life. He had been underestimated before, ignored, doubted, and disrespected. But somehow it always hit differently when it happened at places where professionalism was supposed to live. Places that preached equality and integrity, yet practiced something entirely different when no one was watching. As Marcus gathered his papers and prepared to leave, the assistant from earlier, the one who had rushed downstairs to get him, walked him toward the elevator. She smiled nervously, still embarrassed by how things had gone that morning. "I'm really sorry about what happened, Mr. Reed," she whispered. "Daniel didn't know." Marcus stopped her gently. "It's all right," he said. "He didn't have to know who I was to be respectful." Those words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. The assistant nodded quietly, unable to look him in the eye. As the elevator doors opened, Marcus stepped inside, and just before they closed, Daniel appeared again, almost running, holding a folder in his hands. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Mr. Reed," he said, breathless. "Please, can I talk to you for a second?" Marcus looked at him, calm as ever. "I'm listening." Daniel swallowed hard. "I just wanted to apologize. I was wrong earlier. I shouldn't have assumed. I thought I was doing my job, but..." He stopped mid-sentence, searching for words that didn't sound hollow. "I'm truly sorry." Marcus studied him for a moment. His voice was calm, almost kind, but his eyes held a sharp truth. "Do you know what hurts most, Daniel?" he said softly. "It's not that you stopped me. It's that you looked at me and instantly decided who I couldn't be." Daniel's eyes dropped to the floor. The elevator chimed softly. Marcus continued. "You thought you were protecting your company, but in that moment, you were protecting something else, your assumptions." Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. The kind that fills the space between realization and regret. The elevator doors started to close, but Marcus stopped them with his hand. He looked directly at Daniel, not with anger, but with a quiet sadness. "A company's true character," he said, "isn't shown in how it treats its partners. It's shown in how it treats people who look like they have nothing to offer." Then he stepped back inside. The doors slid shut with a soft ding, leaving Daniel standing there frozen, staring at his own reflection in the silver surface. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. His heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the stares of other employees walking by, whispering. They had seen the tension, felt the discomfort. Some pitied him. Others just looked away. When Daniel finally returned to his desk, he couldn't concentrate. The world felt blurry. He kept hearing Marcus's words in his head, not shouted, not angry, just calm and painfully true. "You decided who I couldn't be." Meanwhile, upstairs, Marcus walked through the parking lot toward his car. The sun had risen higher now, casting bright light on the building's glass walls. He looked up at them, the same walls that had reflected his image just an hour ago when he'd first arrived. He remembered the look on Daniel's face, the disbelief, the awkward apology. And now, as he reached for his car door, a decision began to form quietly in his mind. He had built his company on principles: respect, fairness, and accountability. To him, partnerships weren't just about money, they were about values, and this morning had shown him exactly what kind of values Dunlop Enterprises carried behind their polished presentations. Back inside, Daniel sat alone in the break room. He didn't even touch his coffee. His colleagues passed by whispering things like, "That's the guy who stopped the CEO," but he couldn't respond. Every sound felt distant. Every second felt heavier. He wished he could take it back. That one moment of doubt, that 1 second of judgment. But it was too late. Some mistakes can't be fixed with an apology. Some leave a mark that time doesn't erase. And as Marcus's car pulled out of the parking lot, Daniel stared out the window, realizing the truth. What had started as a small misunderstanding had turned into something much bigger. A mirror reflecting his own bias, his company's culture, and the price of assumption. He didn't know it yet, but the embarrassment he felt now was just the beginning. The real consequence, and the one that would shake the entire company, was still coming. The boardroom was quiet when Marcus walked back in. The air smelled faintly of expensive coffee and polished wood. Large windows filled the room with sunlight, giving everything a golden glow, but the mood wasn't nearly as bright. A few executives chatted nervously near the long glass table, pretending everything was fine. They didn't know what had happened downstairs, but something in Marcus's expression told them that this meeting wasn't going to be like any other. He sat down at the head of the table, calm and collected as always. His assistant handed him a folder with notes, but Marcus didn't open it. Instead, he folded his hands together and looked around the room. Everyone smiled back politely, unaware that a decision was already forming in his mind. The company's president, Mr. Whitman, began the presentation. He spoke with practiced charm, using confident words and slides full of numbers, graphs, and projections. He talked about growth, partnership, and how this deal could take both companies to the next level. His voice filled the room, but Marcus barely heard it. His thoughts were somewhere else, at the building's entrance where Daniel had stopped him without a second thought. He remembered that cold stare, that tone of authority wrapped in politeness. It wasn't anger he felt now. It was disappointment. Disappointment in how easily people could treat someone differently just because of how they looked. The longer Marcus sat there, the more the words from Mr. Whitman began to sound empty. "We value inclusion," Whitman said proudly, clicking through another slide. "We believe in equality and professionalism." Marcus almost smiled at the irony. If only Whitman knew what had happened that morning, he might think twice before saying those words. After about 30 minutes, the presentation ended. Everyone clapped softly. Mr. Whitman looked at Marcus and said, "So, Mr. Reed, what do you think? Are we ready to move forward with this partnership?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, silent for a moment. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of a clock on the wall. The executives waited, smiling nervously, hoping for approval. Finally, Marcus spoke. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made the room fall completely silent. "You've built a great company, Mr. Whitman," he began. "You have a talented team and your presentation is impressive." Whitman smiled, nodding eagerly. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot coming from you." Marcus continued, "But I have to be honest. I'm not sure this partnership will work." The smiles disappeared. The room froze. One of the executives dropped his pen. Whitman blinked, confused. I don't understand," he said, forcing a laugh. "We've been negotiating this for months. Did something change?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes," he said softly. "Something changed this morning." He let the words hang there for a moment. Every face around the table turned serious. "When I arrived," Marcus continued, "one of your managers stopped me at the door. He assumed I didn't belong here. He told me to use the side entrance." A stunned silence filled the room. Whitman looked pale. "That must have been a misunderstanding," he said quickly. I'm sure he didn't mean. Marcus raised a hand gently, stopping him. I'm not here to blame anyone, he said. I'm here to show you something more important. That moment told me more about your company than this entire presentation did. No one spoke. The tension was thick enough to feel. He leaned forward slightly. You talk about equality, respect, and professionalism, but those values don't mean much if they only exist in a slideshow. Real values show up when no one's watching, when your people interact with strangers, when they see someone who doesn't look like them. The executives lowered their eyes. No one dared to interrupt. Marcus's voice softened. I've built my business on relationships, not just revenue. I need to work with people who live their values and not just advertise them. Whitman swallowed hard. Are you saying you're canceling the deal? He asked quietly. Marcus stood up slowly, gathering his folder. I'm saying I'm walking away from it, he said. $10 million is a lot, but self-respect costs more. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Marcus pushed his chair back, nodded politely, and walked toward the door. His footsteps echoed down the hallway like quiet thunder. Behind him, the room was frozen in disbelief. A few executives exchanged shocked glances. Whitman sank back into his chair, realizing that something much bigger than money had just slipped through his hands. When the door closed, the room erupted in whispers. Some were angry, some embarrassed, others stunned. But everyone understood one thing. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about the kind of people they had become. Downstairs, Daniel sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer. He didn't know that at that very moment, the man he had stopped at the door had just canceled a deal worth more than his company's entire yearly profit. And while Marcus drove away, the city skyline flashing in his rearview mirror, he felt no anger, only clarity. Sometimes life doesn't give warnings before it teaches a lesson, and that morning Marcus had learned and taught one that no one at Dunlop Enterprises would ever forget. Marcus walked out of the tall glass building with slow, steady steps. The sun had risen higher now, casting golden reflections across the street. Cars passed by, horns blaring faintly in the distance, but his mind was somewhere else, calm, focused, and heavy with thought. He didn't rush. He didn't slam doors or call anyone to rant. That wasn't his way. Instead, he walked to his car, unlocked it, and sat in the driver's seat without turning the engine on. For a long moment, he just stared at the steering wheel, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. What had happened inside the boardroom, and earlier that morning, replayed in his mind like a quiet movie. The tone in Daniel's voice, the look of disbelief in the executive's eyes, the silence after his words. It was all so clear now. He had worked too hard for too many years to partner with people who couldn't see beyond appearances. He had fought through struggles they couldn't imagine, building his company from a small rented office into a respected name in the industry. Every decision he made had meaning, and now this one would too. Marcus believed business wasn't just about numbers or profits. It was about principles. You could rebuild money lost, but not dignity. You could win new deals, but not self-respect once it was compromised. He closed his eyes for a moment and whispered to himself, It's not just about the contract, and it's about the message. That's when his decision became final. He pulled out his phone, opened his email app, and began typing slowly, carefully. Dear Mr. Whitman, after careful consideration, I've decided to withdraw from the partnership proposal. I respect your company's efforts, but I can't align my business with a culture that doesn't reflect the values of respect and equality. This is not a personal attack, but a professional decision based on principle. Best Marcus Reed, he reread it once. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was firm, dignified, and honest, just like him. He hit send, placed his phone on the passenger seat, and leaned back. As he looked out the windshield, he saw people walking by, some dressed in suits, others in work uniforms, a few delivery drivers carrying boxes. He thought about how many of them had been judged unfairly that same day, just like he had been judged at that door. Inside the building, that email arrived like a lightning bolt. The notification popped up on Whitman's laptop while he was still sitting with his team, trying to calm the storm Marcus had left behind. When he read it, his face went pale. Withdrawn? one executive asked nervously. You mean the deal's off? Whitman didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, realizing that $10 million and something even bigger had just vanished with a single email. He rubbed his forehead, muttering, "How could this happen? How could we let this happen?" Someone finally spoke up. "Maybe it wasn't just the deal we lost," one of the senior managers said softly. "Maybe it was our reputation." The room fell silent again. Everyone knew what he meant. Downstairs, Daniel sat frozen when he got the news. His face turned white as paper. He couldn't breathe for a moment. $10 million gone because of one careless moment. Because of him. He replayed the morning again and again, Marcus standing calmly, explaining who he was and him brushing it off. He felt sick. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a lesson that would follow him for the rest of his career. That evening, Marcus sat at home on his balcony, watching the city lights come alive. He held a cup of coffee, the same calm expression on his face. He wasn't proud or angry, just reflective. He knew some would call him stubborn, that walking away from such a huge deal didn't make sense. But to him, it made perfect sense. He had learned something long ago from his mother. Never let money make you forget your worth. And now, more than ever, that truth echoed in his heart. Marcus knew he'd made the right call. Some decisions don't make sense to the world at first, but they echo for years in the minds of those who need the lesson. Back at Dunlop Enterprises, the executives held a late-night meeting, desperately trying to control the damage, but the truth was they couldn't fix it. The story was already spreading quietly through business circles about the company that lost a multi-million-dollar contract because one manager couldn't see past his own bias. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't post about it or tell the press.
He didn't need to.
The lesson had already been delivered, quietly, powerfully, and permanently. That day, Marcus Reed didn't just walk away from a deal. He walked away from everything that didn't deserve his integrity. And for him, that was worth far more than $10 million. News travels fast in the corporate world, faster than truth, faster than reason. By the next morning, whispers about Marcus Reed's decision had already begun spreading through offices, emails, and conference calls. People were talking. Some said the CEO of Reed Technologies had pulled out of a $10 million deal overnight. Others said it had something to do with a scene at the company's front door. No one knew the full story, but everyone felt the tension. Inside Dunlop Enterprises, the atmosphere was different. The usual morning chatter had vanished. The sound of ringing phones and clicking keyboards filled the space, but no one was really working. Every employee seemed to know something had gone wrong, very wrong. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. He hadn't slept much. His eyes were red, his mind heavy. He could still see Marcus's calm face in the lobby. Could still hear those quiet words that cut deeper than any shout ever could. "You decided who I couldn't be." His supervisor called him into the office around mid-morning. The walk down the hallway felt like walking through water. Slow, heavy, full of dread. Inside, the head of HR sat beside the director, both looking serious. Papers were stacked neatly on the table, but Daniel's name wasn't written on any of them. "Not yet. Daniel," the director began, trying to sound professional. "You know why you're here." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir. The Reed contract was one of our biggest deals. Losing it has affected everyone here. We're conducting a review of what happened." Daniel swallowed hard. "I understand," HR leaned forward. "Marcus Reed didn't file a complaint. He didn't mention your name directly, but the truth is clear. He walked away because of how he was treated when he arrived, because of a judgment made at the door." Those words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to defend himself, to say he was only doing his job. But deep down he knew that wasn't the full truth. He had acted out of assumption, and now everyone was paying for it. "I didn't mean to offend him," Daniel said quietly. "I thought he was—" HR interrupted softly. "You thought wrong." Silence. The director sighed. "We're not here to punish you, Daniel. But this has to be a wake-up call for all of us. What happened wasn't just about one man at the door. It's about how we see people. And right now the whole company is being forced to see itself differently." Daniel nodded slowly, his throat tight. "I wish I could take it back." The director looked at him for a long moment. "We all do." When Daniel stepped out of the office, everything felt heavier. The air, the stairs, even the sound of his own footsteps. He wasn't fired, but something inside him had broken. Respect, confidence, comfort, all gone. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus sat in his office, surrounded by glass walls and quiet hums of technology. His team asked him if he was sure about walking away. He simply replied, "Yes, it's not just about business. It's about what we stand for." That single sentence became the new mantra in his company. His employees admired him more than ever. To them, it wasn't just a decision, it was a statement of integrity. A reminder that values still mattered in a world obsessed with profit. A week later, Dunlop Enterprises made a public announcement. They released a statement about restructuring internal culture and implementing sensitivity and diversity training. It was corporate language, cold, rehearsed, but everyone inside the company knew why it was happening. The story had reached the media through whispers, and though no names were mentioned, people connected the dots. Other businesses began questioning Dunlop's values. Partners hesitated. Investors grew cautious. The $10 million loss was no longer just a number on paper. It had become a symbol. And Daniel, he carried that symbol with him every single day. He became quieter, humbler. He started greeting everyone, the janitor, the delivery staff, even strangers at the door, with genuine respect. Not because someone told him to, but because he finally understood what it felt like to see too late what his assumptions had cost. One evening, as Daniel left the building, he saw a delivery driver standing outside looking lost. Without thinking, Daniel walked over and asked, "Hey, can I help you find someone?" The man smiled, grateful. "Yeah, thanks. I'm just looking for the receiving office." Daniel pointed him in the right direction. It was such a small gesture, but for Daniel it was a quiet redemption, a way of saying sorry, not with words but with change. Across town, Marcus heard from a friend that Dunlop had started internal reforms and staff training. He said nothing, just smiled faintly. Maybe his silence had done more than words ever could. Sometimes the loudest lessons are taught without shouting, through actions, dignity, and the power of walking away. That night, Marcus sat by his window, city lights flickering below. He thought about Daniel for a moment, not with anger, but with a strange kind of empathy. He knew people like Daniel weren't born with bias. They were shaped by it, taught by silence, and changed only by experience. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "Maybe he learned something. Maybe we both did." And in that quiet moment, both men, in different parts of the city, carried the same lesson in their hearts. Respect costs nothing, but losing it can cost everything. Months passed, but the story of that one morning never really faded. It became something people whispered about in meetings, discussed quietly in hallways, and even used as a case study in leadership seminars. No one mentioned names, but everyone knew. The CEO who walked away from a $10 million deal because of one moment at a company's front door. For Marcus Reed, life moved on. His business continued to grow, stronger than ever. Other companies admired his decision, not just for its boldness but for its integrity. To many, he became a symbol of quiet power, the kind that didn't need to shout to make a difference. He started getting invitations to speak at conferences about leadership, equality, and respect. But Marcus always refused the spotlight. When people asked him about that day, he simply said, "I didn't lose a deal. I kept my values." He didn't share the full story publicly. He didn't post about it online or seek attention. That wasn't his way. For him, the lesson had already done its work, not just in that building, but in the hearts of the people who were there. Meanwhile, at Dunlop Enterprises, the company had changed in ways no one expected. They held regular diversity training, brought in new HR policies, and made sure every employee, from security guards to executives, was treated with the same respect. It wasn't easy. It took time, effort, and humility. But slowly, the company began to rebuild its reputation. And at the center of that transformation was Daniel. He was no longer the confident, strict manager he once was. He had become quieter, softer, more human. People noticed the difference. He treated everyone with kindness, and not out of fear, but out of understanding. He volunteered to lead the company's respect in the workplace sessions, often starting with the same simple line. "One morning I made a mistake that cost this company $10 million. But the real loss was the respect I took for granted." No one interrupted him when he spoke. Everyone listened, because they could hear the honesty in his voice, the kind that comes only after deep regret. Outside of work, Daniel carried the lesson into his life. He started noticing people more. The janitor cleaning late at night, the delivery person struggling with boxes, the intern sitting alone at lunch. He went out of his way to make them feel seen. It wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about change. One day, almost a year later, Daniel received an envelope in the mail. It had no return address, just his name written neatly on the front. Inside was a short note. Change is never easy, but it's always possible. I hope you keep choosing it. Mr. Daniel read the initials twice before realizing who they belonged to. Marcus Reed. He smiled softly, holding the letter for a long moment. It wasn't forgiveness written in big words, but something even better. Acknowledgement. A quiet sign that maybe in his own way, Marcus had seen the change. That letter stayed pinned to Daniel's office wall from that day onward. Not as a reminder of shame, but as a reminder of growth. Every new employee who walked in would ask about it, and Daniel would tell the story. Not of the mistake, but of the lesson. Across town, Marcus watched his company flourish. His employees respected him not just as a leader, but as a man who lived by his values. Every time a new deal came his way, he thought back to that morning at Dunlop. It reminded him to choose wisely, not based on money, but on meaning. He often told his team, the true worth of success isn't in how much you earn, it's in how much integrity you keep while earning it. Years later, when Marcus was invited to a global leadership summit, he finally agreed to speak. Standing on stage before hundreds of young entrepreneurs, he told the story, not naming names, not shaming anyone, just sharing the truth. And when he finished, the hall was silent. Then came the applause, long, heartfelt, and real. He smiled gently and ended with these words, never assume someone's value by what you see. Because one day, the person you underestimate might be the one holding the door to your future, or closing it. That line would be quoted for years to come, printed on posters, shared online, and remembered in classrooms. But for Marcus, it was never about fame or glory. It was simply about doing what was right, and so the story lived on, not as a scandal, not as a headline, but as a lesson that changed two men and one company forever. A lesson that whispered through time, quietly reminding everyone who heard it, respect is free, but losing it can cost more than you can ever imagine.